Hi! Do you like the internet? You probably do, judging by the fact you're using it right now. And do you like space? Not the in-between planet thing, just space in general. Like, for example, a forest, or the room you're in, the store you go to, or even St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. But most importantly, do you like the contemporary world and thinking way too much about it? You probably don't like it much if you're thinking about it a lot. And do you like getting your view on the world, states, nations, space and the internet get completely shaken up? Well, I hope you do, because that is exactly what this video aims to. I want to change the way in which you see space, and especially online space, together with all the online culture that it breeds. Today, we shall take a critical look at the internet from a spatial standpoint. That means that we're gonna get into what spaces the internet creates, how it relates to the normal space, and most importantly, to hegemony. Let's get into it! You, amongst many other people, would think that space is just something outside of subjectivity, an a priori territory which exists outside of human interaction. Something that is just there. Space is fundamentally just lying around. It is the there par excellence. You never really think about it because it's always here and there. There's nothing much to it. But philosophers have often spoken about space. Place and position are two of Aristotle's categories of being. That means that space is a thing which would describe something else. Everything has a place and a position. On the other hand, Kant argues that space and time are just pure forms of intuition, things which make our understanding of the world possible, but which do not really exist independently from us and our minds, or at least we cannot know their existence outside of our minds. In his view, space and time are necessary for us to form any kind of lived experience. They mediate between things in themselves and phenomena. They act as sort of filters through which things in themselves must get so that we can sense and understand them. But those are metaphysical approaches. The viewpoint we shall use today is a little bit more practical, more social, for we shall not have a metaphysical inquiry into the nature of space. We live in a 21st century, after all. The theory we shall use and apply to the spatiality of the internet comes from a guy named... Okay, let me check this real quick.
Henri Lefebvre.
Henri is a 20th century French sociologist and philosopher. He posits the idea of a social space, a space produced by every society. And we have to make it clear that Henri's social space isn't really what we would understand as a social space. It isn't a place where you go out, talk to people, make friends, have fun experiences. No, that's not really it. I mean, that's part of it, of course, but it's not all of it. It is just a way to see space where the reality of it is social. It's not a social construct, though. Space is not an imaginary thing upon which we all agreed to believe that it's real. What he says is that it has social functions. And how does he analyze those social functions, you may ask? Well, if you know anything about French philosophers and sociologists from the 20th century, then you will not be surprised to find out that he talks from a Marxist standpoint. As such, space is social because it contains all the relations of production and reproductions of a society, referring to the ways in which things get made and which people get made. Henri's social space is based on the triad of lived, conceived and perceived, where perceived space is called territorial practice. This represents the space in itself, as in that a priori territory which exists without us. The conceived space is also called representations of space. This refers to a way in which the space is imagined and produced by architects, engineers, urbanists, planners, whatever. And the last but not least, there's the lived space, i.e. representational space. That is the way in which people see and understand a space, together with everything that it entails. Social spaces are vastly fluctuating. They can overlap with each other and change whenever there is a change in the means of production. This means that they are representative of the hegemonic order. Hegemony is a term made popular by Italian communist Antonio Gramsci. It refers to more than just pure simple domination. Hegemony is also ideological and cultural domination, emphasizing the ways in which the ruled can be made to obey the rulers without even noticing. Okay, let's integrate this concept of hegemony into our social space. The representations of space are made by the hegemonic order to lure in and impose a specific status quo on the users of space, the people like me and you, the ones actually living inside a social space. Representations of space, so the ways in which the space is built, have historically been the representational spaces, the ways in which they see the world, their ideology, basically, of the ruling classes, representational spaces which they wish to impose upon the others. Okay, so we have the system laid down. Let's do a quick recap of the terms used, because we will need them. Representations of space are ways in which space is produced. They help maintain the hegemonic order. Representational spaces are ways in which people understand space. The hegemonic order tries to impose theirs on us. And hegemony is basically the ruling status quo. Now that we have the tools, let's get into why this is actually important. Over history, the state was always deeply tied to spatiality. Henri says that every state is formed through violence towards a space. That through the unifying principle which it pushes, referring to national, religious and social unification, a state totalizes all aspects of social practice and creates its own space. And that is the space of the state, where the hegemony of the ruling classes can clearly manifest itself. Every building out of every period in history is a symbol of the hegemony of the ruling classes. In Christian architecture, they reproduce the motifs of the Christian mythos. Fascist architecture was obsessed with order and grandeur, attributes which manifested through massive imposing buildings, monuments to the strength of fascist nations. And contemporary cities are full of glass office buildings, imposing labor and capital as pillars of society. And this makes us think a bit. Who makes up the hegemonic order? Billionaires or politicians? Well, it is impossible now to say which one of them is more potent in the producing of space. The only certainty that we have is that the two of them aren't necessarily enemies. In current forms of fascism, the state takes the social and capital takes the economic, while also working hand in hand basically. Their only enemy is a sort of anti-hegemonic resistance, which we will get to, but in order to do that, we must ask another question first. What ties representational spaces to the representations of space? What is the link between the produced space and the understanding of said space as produced? Well, Henri believes that what ties these two together is a sort of spatial code. These spatial codes aren't really ways to read or to interpret space, but to understand and produce it. And I believe that these spatial codes could be correlated with the idea of culture. The spatial hegemony of the state manifests itself through the idea of culture, or better yet, national culture. This is equivalent to Henri's concept of social codes. To further explain this, I shall use a definition from Terry Eagleton's The Idea of Culture, where he refers to it as being made by the state with the purpose of a collective pedagogy, a way to inspire the same values over the people which the state represents. As such, a national state embodies culture inasmuch as culture is a way to promote the hegemony of the state. It moves the users of space into the representational spaces which the hegemonic order wants them to fit into. Through the medium of national culture, we see imaginary problems being created and solved in order to keep the focus off the real issues, such as the means of production and all of that. We can now see why a lot of people, most especially conservatives, try to hold on to national culture with everything that they have. They try to define it and exterminate everything that doesn't fit exactly inside of it. Progressives always see a lot of hate for destroying national culture. Okay, but the good news are that now, by integrating this idea of culture, we are getting close to a solution for escaping the social spatial hegemonic order. One can, in a sense, get out by being aware, by being conscious of the spatial system which is all around him, by using the representations of space which are imposed by the hegemonic order in order to create a different set of representational spaces for yourself. You can give another meaning to the space around you. This means that if you realize that everything around you is a symptom of the ruling class's hegemony, you can think about space in a different way. You can see Dubai, for example, not as a cool, rich and futuristic city, but as the neoliberal hellhole which it is. But although it's a step forward, getting out of this trap of spatiality does not mean that you can create another type of space. You are still forced to live within the limits of the same space and bear witness to the people you love fall into the same trap which you now try to escape. But here is where the essence of this video comes into question. The internet. How does it fit inside Henri's theory of space? You would expect it to be a big leap forward when it comes to destroying hegemonies. It's a free wild place after all. Or at least that's what we would like to think. The internet isn't really as free and amazing as it sounds, but we shall explore the internet's limitations later. For now, let's look on the bright side. Let's see what it can do.
Yeah, boy!
Where, how, by whom and to what purpose is information stored and processed? How is computer technology deployed and whom does it serve? We know enough in this area to suspect the existence of a space peculiar to information science, but not enough to describe that space, much less to claim close acquaintanceship with it. This is what Henri says about technology in 1974. In a period where no one could have even dreamed of a global interconnected communications network accessible to the majority of the population of the world. In the last few years, as we all know, things changed rapidly. In 2022, Achille Mbembe would say that the technosphere has become a structuring dimension of the biosphere. The faculty of symbolization is no longer the exclusive property of the human brain. From this unfastening, a totally new world will perhaps suddenly arise, in which technology, biology, and genetics will become one, and both language and the faculty of symbolization will be shared between human intelligence and that of machines and other artificial organs. How did this massive change in thinking about the internet and technology occur? In just 48 years, we got from a point where we just don't know to the point where we might soon see a merging of technological, human and biological spheres. And let me just tell you, such a representational space would bring massive changing to the current spatial order. But such a radical change must not necessarily occur in order for us to see changes brought on by technology in the last couple of years. The contemporary world already has a new form of spatiality. This being the virtual world. The world of the internet radically alters any type of conventional cultural and spatial hegemony. Following Eagleton's idea of culture as collective pedagogy, manifested in its most potent form through the state, we can easily see how the internet destroys this kind of space-culture relationship. The concept of a state has its foundation on the existence of a territory, and on a set of people living inside that territory, upon which the state can manifest its hegemonic order. And culture has always been a territorial phenomena, manifested in the idea of a civilization, of a culture, ethnicity, nation, etc. Information and a unique way of living would only spread inside the geography which allowed it to. In similar climates, you find similar cultures. In neighboring territories, you find cultures which are very much alike. Statal cohesion could not, until recently, resist in the face of different climates, for it is very hard to impose a similar culture on a set of people whom geography pushed to very dissimilar practices. I don't try to be a geographical determinist, but we must see that it's true in a sense. It plays a really big part at least. Now, with the rise of the internet, a similar or close-by territory does not necessarily represent a condition for cultural homogeneity. First of all, the structure of urban centers, and yes, sometimes rural ones too, but it's more pronounced in urban areas, almost completely eliminates the need for people to adapt and live by the rhythms of nature. As culture no longer needs to be formed in relation to the environment, and as urban centers are almost exactly the same all around the globe, a sort of cultural void gets produced. This void is further fed by the change in style of communion, which comes after urbanization. A city has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, while in a village or primitive clan lived only a couple thousand people at most. The individual which was used to know all these townspeople by name now hits the social impossibility of having millions of people to talk to. And this forces him to find alternative ways to form communities. As such, when online forums and social media appeared, we also saw the rise of internet cultures and subcultures. And these are great factors of change amongst the youth, especially amongst those people which were raised basically on the internet. Culture can no longer really be imposed on a national level, because for some people, culture is an internet phenomenon. And this makes internet cultures a bizarre internationalist thing. And I say bizarre because they're not internationalist in a way that globalization is, for example. Online subcultures don't really take the culture from one country or part of the world and spread it all around the globe. Instead, there are lots of people from many different nations and cultures which work together on the internet to form their own culture. As such, online cultures and subcultures go way further than national borders and territories. And that's also one of the most interesting aspects of online cultures. They can't really be bordered. And they also can't be clearly denominated. While ethnicity-based cultures aren't always denominated very clearly, they are way more enclosed than internet ones. In the previous centuries, for example, if you visited the multicultural region, like for example Habsburg-occupied Transylvania, you could have found communities of Romanians, Hungarians, Saxons, Jews, Romas, all living in the same village, but in sort of closed-off communities. Lots of villages had the Romanian side and the Hungarian side. And while yes, they used to have economic relations and sometimes even intercultural marriages, they were often frowned upon by both groups. But now, because internet cultures don't have a physical spatiality or territory, they don't live in gated communities. Internet cultures have a fluidity which normal culture lacks. Yes, Serbians are akin to Romanians, and Romanians to Moldovans, and Moldovans to Ukrainian, and so on and so forth. But for internet cultures, you don't have these clear delimitations. You have really vague terms like, I don't know, metalhead or gamer or otaku, which are often used by people outside of the community, by the people which don't understand all the nuances inside of such a group. And plus, for internet communities, there's always overlap between cultures. There are lots of people which watch anime, play video games and listen to metal all at the same time. Because online culture is such a vast spectre, each person gets to have his own unique culture in a way, even if that sounds contradictory. In the past, people of the same ethnic group would have the same fundamental myths, traditions and religion, even if the things like clothes or dances or music varied from region to region. But now, each person which grew up on the internet has internalized his own particular set of information, movies, TV shows, values, books, heroes, whatever. And yes, those always differ from person to person. Yes, there are internet bubbles, and as such, there are shared interests between communities, But there aren't two people in this whole world which have the same exact internet culture. And yes, of course, I have to make the disclaimer that obviously traditional culture still has a big impact on those people. Older generations always will inflict their culture upon us. Even if you spend 12 hours per day online, you would still be dragged off to church on Sunday. And you had to go to the same school that the people around you would go to, and you had to visit grandma and kiss her on the cheek. Traditional culture also has its grip on the people raised on the internet. It's just not that strong as before. It is also clear that this cultural shift is just beginning. For internet culture is a pretty recent phenomena, and yet we can see massive cultural shifts based on what you viewed on the web. What will happen when kids raised on the internet will have their own kids which will be raised on the internet? What will happen when this will be the status quo for the last 100 years? What culture will these people have? And let me tell you, this will have big effects on nationalism and how people view states. But before we get to that, we should turn our attention back to hegemony. The spatiality created by the internet has a two-sided relationship to the hegemonic order. It seems that the spaces created by online subcultures in relation to the economic hegemonic order are in no way revolutionary, but quite the opposite. Consumerist neoliberalism has shown us that it can integrate any type of cultural activity into its economic body. And as such, even culture which are born of the internet can still be appropriated by late-stage capitalism. And yes, I would say that it really is a consequence of this internet multiculturalism that it's getting so easily devoured by capitalism. Because the cultural background of a youngling raised on the internet is so vast and varied, he must find as many ways as he can to signal off his personality through clothing, accessories, or gestures and hairstyles. That helps him get recognized by the others around him for having a similar cultural background. And obviously the need for more clothing and accessories feeds right into the neoliberal system, being a clear manifestation of the consumerist logic. The bad part is that you can't give up on this type of consumerism, because it helps you navigate the Gen Z social space. How would people know that I like metal if I don't have this sick-ass battle vest? Or this band t-shirt? Therefore, it's sad to say, but the capitalist hegemonic order can't be beaten by the internet. It's even amplified. But, on the other hand, and that's good news, the one who can suffer is the national order. The internet is very dangerous for national cultural hegemony. Whenever conventional space is built out of online space, representational spaces produce the representations of space, and not vice versa. The virtual space creates the forms which the real space reproduces. Metalhead bars, nerd places where they play D&D, and even the Comic-Con. These are perfect examples of internet cultures and their relationship with real spatiality. These are real spaces created just for internet cultures. And this just goes to show that internet cultures have a massive impact on the cultural hegemony which the state wants. The idea of a national culture or common values will be much less useful as propaganda in a world in which people will much less associate with national culture. People raised on the internet will have many different traditions and legends than people raised in a traditional culture. People raised on the internet will have different traditions and legends while still living in the same country. Therefore, the myth of a national culture from the past will be much harder to weaponize for political purposes. What will happen when the people raised on the internet will become the hegemonic order themselves? And of course, that case isn't right now. Lots of people weren't raised on the internet, that's still a new thing. But in 50 years or so, the world will look totally different. And I really think that the internet might be able to defeat nationalism. Now, after we analyze the internet's relationship with real spatiality, we should take a look at the internet spatiality in itself. How do the relations of hegemony function on the internet itself?
It's just really important that people have both the reality and the perception that they are able to speak freely within the bounds of the law.
Henri's theory as a starting point, we can find both differences and commonalities between internet and conventional spatiality. The internet, though, is a massive place which is impossible to measure geographically. Just as an online culture isn't in a single country only, it also isn't on one single internet platform either. It can be found over many internet platforms, social medias, YouTube videos, movies. Finding a common spatiality for an internet culture, or for the internet as a whole, is at least difficult. But we are lucky, for there are some principles which can be applied for the internet as a whole. The production of space is valid here too. There are users and producers, and both are more numerous than they have ever been. Representations of space produced for the internet still have a hegemonic role. It still imposes its ideology. Social medias aren't the Wild West which the internet was at its conception. Of course, each user can create his own space on his account, posting whatever he likes. But this does not affect the overlaying spatiality. Social medias are like a residential building of sorts. You can own an apartment and you can decorate it with whatever you want, but you still can't change the building's facade. The building itself will still impose the same hegemonic space upon the passers-by. It's true that on the internet, in theory at least, anyone can get into your apartment and either muddy or polish your decorations. But in practice, the area in which you live is an isolated gated community. Platforms in themselves, which are the ones producing spatiality, are programmed to impose the same ideology that the ruling classes want. The best and easiest example is TikTok, which by its nature reduces the attention span of users by literally creating an addiction to it. And the mini spaces created by individual users do not manage to hold their ground in front of the hegemonic pressure imposed by the platform in itself. Even if someone on TikTok creates 3-minute long videos, watching one of those won't fix your attention span. And plus, we can't talk about internet spatiality without mentioning the last and most famous comparison between traditional spatiality and the internet. And that is, of course, techno-feudalism. It comes from Yanis Varoufakis' book with the same name, Techno-feudalism. The spatiality of the internet also encompasses the economic branch of spatiality. When the internet started to grow, a new type of marketplace arose, the internet marketplace, or digital markets, as you might know them. And those are often controlled by agents which stretch the boundaries of capitalism to the point of their breaking, becoming more like feudalism than capitalism. That's where the name of techno-feudalism comes from. By following the example of Amazon, we can see how the usual market has been replaced by something which does not only have a monopoly on the market itself, but also algorithmically dictates all the goods and the movements which are promoted. Through Amazon's products and algorithms, this company controls and creates our desires to then offer us solutions for them. And it really works on the model of medieval feudalism, where a seigneur gives his vassal a piece of land to exploit and take value out of. Just like that, digital platforms like Amazon give digital fiefs to the producers of goods and services, to the capitalists basically, where they could sell their goods and services. And of course, this feudal model was then copied by other companies, including Alibaba in China, for example. To better understand this, Varoufakis builds up this image of a village in the Wild West. A lone cowboy arrives to said village and notices that a guy named Jeff, he owns everything. The bar, the church, the stables, and every other building in the village is owned by Jeff. The cowboy then realizes that even the benches, the street lamps, or the soil under his feet is also owned by said Jeff. And Jeff can change those whenever he wants based on his own wishes. Here we can see the relationship between representational spaces, clearly controlled by the hegemonic order, and representations of space, which are now more easily produced than ever before. And because of the value of users' data, those fiefdoms appear everywhere on the internet now. Every social media, website, or video game Every place which can offer the algorithm more information about us becomes a techno-feudal fiefdom, one for whom many lords fight, with their pay being our time and attention. And money, of course. Thus being said, one would believe that at least the small spaces could survive this hegemonic order. Small spaces like individual accounts. Those can post whatever they want. They don't have to agree with what the platform says. But that sadly is not the case. The spatial organism of a social media is easily influenced by the algorithm, which is easily influenced by the people which control it and produce it. Through the shadow banning mechanism, the interaction of users with some accounts can be severely limited without actually explicitly deleting said account. Shadow banning, for those who haven't heard of the term, is the algorithmic action of limiting the number of people which will interact with an account. Mostly accounts talking about political problems on both sides of the political spectrum get shadow banned. But we can see in recent years how great changes in politics can affect this shadow banning mechanism. And now this censorship is used more and more often, especially against marginalized people. Those which hope to get a voice through the help of social media, but instead got their vocal cords cut out. For example, ever since Elon Musk, the new CEO of X, former Twitter, bought the platform, there have been 4 times more recorded shadow bans, even though Elon Musk is a massive free speech enthusiast, as he always declares. And of course, in this period, Musk was involved with the United States government, merging capital with the national and creating the same hegemonic order in internet space as in real life. And as such, showing the whole world that representation of digital space are still created by the ever same hegemonic order. And besides all of that, on the contemporary internet we can see that there's clearly a hegemony of the masses. Something's popularity is judged by how much interaction it has with other accounts. And that means likes, views and comments. Things which are more popular get further promoted to more people. And the hegemonic structure has really adapted to this. Now with bot farms, you can change the internet spatiality and even people's opinions in real life. Bots, algorithms and artificial intelligences now post and comment on videos which support the hegemonic order. As long as on the internet every account creates a space, the ideology or side which generates the most space, which means the most accounts, brings in the most influence. To further the analogy with the apartment, it doesn't matter if you own your apartment, because all the others have already been bought by a real estate shark. And this is how you limit anti-hegemonic spatiality. Okay, so the internet doesn't offer any new freedoms. It is plundered yet again by profit-driven late-stage capitalism. How shall we comfort ourselves now after this massive shock? Perhaps by coming back to the winning side, to national culture, and to seeing how internet culture will affect international politics. There is another important part of spatiality, one which we have not discussed already, but which is also affected a lot by the internet and its own spatiality. And that is the concept of the state and the relationship between states. International law always had a juridical and administrative organization. Right now, the global juridical system recognizes 195 countries, out of which 193 are United Nations members. This membership gives the 193 states equality and sovereignty in the international social system. Or that's what we like to think, at least. And this is an aspect of spatiality upon which I insist because the internet also changes it a lot. To understand what a territorial order refers to, I shall be using the book by Carl Schmitt named Nomos of the Earth. Nomos is an ancient Greek word which is very hard to translate. It combines the appropriation, utilization and distribution of a territory. It was translated to law, but it's more close to a territorial order. It's a way of understanding space and the territorial relationships between organization, people, and countries. Our current nomos must be understood through our history and through our Eurocentric past. The Jus Publicum Europaeum, as it was called, was both the foundation and the reality of our global but Eurocentric system. This system was based on the antithesis between European territory and non-European territory. While in Europe, in the civilized world, they tried to bracket off wars and limit them in the very least, the territory outside of the continent was a free zone. Asia, Africa, and the New World, meaning the two Americas, were free to be exploited and conquered. Whomever had a state, in the European understanding of the word state of course, was safe. They were just integrated in the European territorial order. But those which did not, well, they could be conquered and exploited. In the British colonies, for example, the king had all the power. He can do whatever he wants. While in mainland Britain, systems of checks and balances were put in place so that the king did not have unlimited power. And as such, while in Europe every territorial change was closely supervised by the great powers of the time, and borders usually changed very little if at all, Russia would conquer all of Siberia. Spain and Portugal would split up all the Americas, and France and England would have a race to carve up India and Africa. Even worse, fought on the colonies between European powers had a different status than once on European soil. The idea of equality, at least legal if not else, between European and non-European soil came very late. The demise of the Eurocentric territorial order was caused by the ascension of America and Japan to the status of global powers, which forced the states of Europe to give equality in front of the law to all the states, without caring about which continent they were located on. And from America's ascension to the status of a great power came all of the troubles which plagued the concept of the state in the 21st century. While in the Eurocentric order the difference was being made between European and non-European territory, the strongest border of this Americanized territorial order is that between the public and private sectors, the political and the economic. And this split clearly leads to some outrageous situations now. Because of globalization and the free market, some researchers have come to the conclusion that borders between states have become obsolete. And this conclusion can easily be justified when you think, for example, of the DRC. In the DRC, in 2015, cobalt exports made up for 97% of the country's total export earnings and 26% of its GDP. That much dependence on one particular good isn't great for a country. But what makes it worse is that in 2009, China signed a contract with the then president Joseph Kabila, through which it basically bought 15 out of the 19 big mineral deposits of the country. And how can you differentiate between economical and political when corporations from another country control the biggest industry in your country, which is a quarter of your GDP? How can the concept of a national unitary state hold up when international corporations have more influence inside the state than the state itself? Well, on paper it holds up, as the state can limit what companies are doing inside the territory. Even if a company in practice controls a lot of the territory of a state, that land in the context of international relations is still controlled by the state. Even if, in reality, things like corruption, personal gain and economic growth often go against the regulation of big companies, the fantasy of the state as a basis of the international order still holds strong. After all, it would be very hard to make a juridical boundary around every corporation. But even if the statal nomos can hold in the face of the free market, it is still clear that it has to change somehow. The internet only accelerates the need for such a change. Right now, we're at a crossroads. We don't know what territorial order we have. The Pax Americana seems to have ended, and a couple of geographical political blocks seem to take form. Even so, these blocks, or Großräume, as Schmitt called them, are very confused themselves. Is Russia in the same bloc as China? What about India and the US? Or even Europe and the US right now? The current order is in shambles, and the UN is too weak to do anything about that, as was the League of Nations before it. This is why our current spatial disorder allows for wars of annihilation to occur, like the genocide in Gaza, or the war in Ukraine, where Russia doesn't even recognize the existence of a Ukrainian people. We do not have a clear territorial order which can bracket off wars and limit the destruction that they cause. This uncertainty must factor in the changes which the internet brings to the global order. This, together with the issues which climate change puts into play, brings us towards an universalist, internationalist spatial order. With this division of culture inside a single state brought on by the internet, social cohesion might become impossible. Not even classic types of multicultural management could work, like, I don't know, dualist Austria-Hungary, because this cultural split has no clear margins. There are no borders which would circumvent one cultural movement or other. In this context, the logical conclusion is that we need some kind of international fluidity, where technology must be accepted and integrated, but which should integrate nature in the system too. Something like what Achille Mbembe suggested. A world which is equal between people, technology and nature, and which is based on the practice of cohabitation, of living together. This practice is based on the fundamental trait of everyone ever, which says that once you exist, you enter into the global spatial and ontological order. And as such, right now is the best time to start being more acceptive for others, for nature, for technology, and for different groups of people, most importantly. Because soon enough, there'll be way more different groups of people. Okay, so to come back to Henri, the internet produces spatiality. It creates new representations of space from pure representational spaces and transposes them in real life. To the internet, the hegemony of the nation and the culture which it imposes is combated. Even if it doesn't change capitalism, at least it erodes the national and the culture which it promotes, and imposes the need for us to see space in a different light. That being the space of the internet, the space of the earth, the space of the states. All of those we have to change our understanding of. And this is a kind of pleasant thing to believe if you think about it. We just have to live on as we already do, and great positive changes will occur in the world. But just as I am saying all of this, the far right has gained more and more support from young people all over the Western civilization. How can the internet really fight nationalism if it's stronger in the age of the internet? Perhaps things start to change from what I talked in the video. Now even older people, not only young ones, use the internet. And they of course share their national culture. National culture seems to fight the internet culture on its own playing ground. We can but wait and see who wins this inevitable battle. Internet cultures or national cultures. But today that's all, folks. If you like the video, make sure you like and subscribe, and perhaps leave your opinions down below in the comments. Until next time, have a great day.